Hey guys, and welcome back to this week's Early Stoppage. This is the 30-minute podcast, and this week we have got Brooks Bailey on. How you doing, Brooks?
I'm doing good, Jay. It's a pleasure to be on here with you.
It's all right, man. It's an honour to have you on. For all the listeners who are watching every week, we have a new guest on, and this week it's Brooks, who's coming in from the MMA Addiction. It's a brand new Facebook page, and I heard you're going to get a website sorted in the future. Is this true?
Yeah, we're just working on everything right now. Like you said, it's brand new, so we just got to get everything down, and we also got a Twitter right now, so we're just working on everything and big things to come. So,
well, we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but we've also got to give out a shout out to our host, MMA Victor. Basically, the agenda for this week, we've got a lot to cover in 30 minutes. We're going to have to fly through it. We've got the UFC review, going to chat to our guests. We've got the biggest news stories of the week, a UFC preview, and as always, we will end it hopefully with an early stoppage. But I guess if it's all right with you, we'll get started straight away with the UFC review. Did you have a chance to watch the fights this weekend? I mean, there was a lot of submissions this weekend.
Yeah. It was incredible. I think they broke a record with the number of submissions on the card.
I think it was either 5 or 6. I can't remember off by heart, but I know in the main event we should begin with the main event, and that was Fabricio Verdum submitting Antonio Minotauro Nogueira in the. It was the first round, wasn't it?
It was the second round.
Second round, man. He survived the first round where Verdum was on top. He was in some weird positions in terms of jiu-jitsu, but Verdum pulled it out the bag. How did you think of this fight, man? Did it play out as you expected it to?
Yeah, it was. I thought it would end quick. I wasn't sure if Verdum would submit him. I had predicted that he would actually KO him, considering, Big Nog's had a lot of mileage on him, and he's taken a lot of punishment throughout his career. I don't think his chin is exactly what it used to be. So I was thinking that Verdum's Muay Thai would just, be too much for Nogueira, and he would, end up kneeing him in the face and knocking him out. But, it doesn't surprise me that Verdum ended up getting the submission.
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely crazy. I mean, I also had a second round TKO. You had a knee to the face, as you said. I had a knee to the stomach. I thought the lungs would give out or it'd crack him in the solar plexus. But to see him submit him just says that Verdum's submission game is on another level right now. It's not a Kimura like Frank Mir. That's more of a power move. Verdum had him in an armbar.
Yeah, and I think Verdum's grappling has always been, a little bit better than Nogueira's. Everybody's always noted Nogueira for how great his jiu-jitsu is and everything, but I think Verdum's always been on another level. So, like I said, it doesn't surprise me that he ended up getting the submission on him.
I know this is only a quick show. We could go into this a lot more, but how do you see Kane versus Verdum? Would you rather see Kane versus Verdum or Kane versus JDS 3? What would you rather see?
Honestly, either one would be great. I think that, JDS and Kane 3 would be fine because, they've both got one win apiece. So just to figure out, the rubber match will be good.
I've got to say the opposite. I'm a fan of Verdum Kane. But the other question I've got to ask you is, after these two fights, Verdum and JDS, who else is even in contention?
Wow. If Alistair Overeem and Travis Brown, I think the winner of those guys, maybe if they could win one more fight after that, I think one of those guys could be it. Or maybe even, Roy Nelson, if he can get a win over a top 5 guy.
I think you're right. I think he's got to fight a Cormier or a Hunt, but once Kane's got rid of these two guys, in my opinion, he's pretty much cleared out the division. That's just me. But I guess we should move on to the co-main event, and Thiago Silva, my boy, my favourite fighter. I thought it was the beatdown of the year. everything looked like he just looked like another level fighter on that night. I mean, fair play to Fei Zhao. He's doing well in the first 2 minutes. Threw a spinning back elbow, and it looked like after that move, he had an adrenaline dump. Maybe he injured his back or something, and Thiago just pulled it on. What do you think happened in that fight, man?
Man, first of all, Tiago's a bad man. That dude is awesome. So, I can't agree with you there more, Jay. But yeah, I think that what happened, in my opinion at least, is that Fei Zhao, I think he lost confidence after, he cracked Tiago right on the chin with that spinning back elbow, and it didn't even seem to phase Tiago at all. So, I think he kind of broke his will there, and Tiago's not one you want to, lose your confidence against, because he'll beat the shit out of you, and that's exactly what happened right there. And I'm looking forward to watching Tiago in his next fight and whatever comes after that also.
I've got to say the same. I mean, we will talk about the biggest news stories of the week, but there is a crazy thing happening between Thiago Silva and Bigfoot. So for that reason, we will skip the third UFC review, which was the TUF Brazil finale. But I will ask you quickly: do you want to see whoever Leonardo Santos won the series, but there was the guy who he pulled out for? Do you want to see the rematch between them two?
No, and all honesty, it doesn't matter to me. I'd rather see Santos go down to lightweight, where he's that's his natural weight class. I'd like to see him make his way through that division, which in all honesty, I'm not sure if he has much to offer.
I think you're right. His jiu-jitsu is on another level, but there's a lot of guys with good takedown defense in that division. So we will sum it up by saying, who, in your opinion, stole the show? Who is this week's showstopper?
In my opinion, this week's showstopper has to be Hani Jason. That was a damn impressive performance by him. I expected it to be more of an all-out war between those guys, and he made short work of Mike Wilkinson. And he made it look easy, which it obviously isn't.
I've got to be biased, and I've got to disagree with you, I'm afraid. I've got to go with my boy Thiago Silva. There was another name who I'd like to put on this. There was actually two. I'd like to have said Eric Silva, and I'd like to have also said Rafael Sunsao. However, both of them came in as massive favourites, and for that reason, they just can't be on my list. So for me, we've got two this week, two showstoppers who absolutely, both of them did a fantastic job. They both came in very close in terms of odds and things, and that was Ronnie Jason and Thiago Silva. So there you go, guys. Go and watch those two fights. Fantastic finishes on both of them. So now's the chance we get a chance to kind of calm down and talk to you. I mean, as we mentioned before, you are starting up your own site now, the MMA Addiction. I know you, of course, from the playground. So what's kind of started you off to do your own thing? I mean, what started you off to think about starting up this MMA Addiction thing?
Well, in all honesty, this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I've always been a huge MMA fan. It's just that I guess there just isn't enough for me, so I'm always looking for something new and something more to do. And I guess it's just I'm hungry for just to learn more and to see more. And eventually I'd like to be doing something like you're doing here with the Early Stoppage, and and Ray has helped me also. So that's just the main reason why I've been wanting to do the MMA Addiction.
Well, it's all looking fantastic. I love the layout of the Facebook page. I'm really looking forward to the idea of you putting a website out there. Have you got any idea of times when it will be up?
Hopefully within the next month or two, we'll be getting that up. Maybe even before that. It's just with my schedule right now, it's pretty hectic, and I've been using any free time I have to get things accomplished as far as the MMA stuff. So, as soon as possible, but hopefully with, no longer than a month.
Well, I look forward to getting it set up, and you've got to send me out a link so whenever it starts, I'll promote it on this show and stuff like that. But you are at the MMA Addiction on Twitter, and you can find it. It's all one word on Facebook. the MMA addiction. I mean, there's multiple MMA addiction sites, but it's the MMA with the capital MMA addiction, just like that. And I know you've been a massive fan because I've known you from the playgrounds from at least when I started in 2009. You've been there from the beginning, but you joined in 2007 when the site was barely even, nobody was really on it. You joined it back then. How long have you been watching MMA?
I've been watching, all the time since 2000. I believe it was 2004 when Tito and Chuck fought for the first time. I was at a sports bar just having a few drinks and something to eat, and they had UFC playing on TV, and I watched Tito versus Chuck 1, and as soon as I seen that fight, I was hooked. I had seen some earlier UFCs like UFC 1 and 2, but I was really young back then, and I didn't really focus on that. And I was really a big professional wrestling fan when I was younger. So I think it was just almost like a natural transition from, being younger and watching professional wrestling, all the time to, growing up a little bit and coming into, contact with, just seeing the UFCs on TV. And like I said, ever since Tito Chuck won, I fell in love with the sport.
So, I mean, that was an absolutely fantastic fight, and I can understand why you got hooked on it. I know myself that was a big, big money fight for the UFC. You've said about professional wrestling, you're from America, so I've got to ask the question, do you do any training yourself? I mean, were you wrestling back at school or anything?
No, actually, I was not. I guess I was a little bit lazy, but I was into other sports, baseball and football, American football, and I never got into training or anything. I wish I did. I've got a 1-year-old son, just turned 1, and I think when he turns 3 or 4, I'm probably going to enroll him in some classes, whether it's jiu-jitsu or sambo or kickboxing, something like that. And when he's doing that, I'll probably actually look to get some training in myself. So a little bit late, but it's never too late to learn.
No, it's a fantastic idea. I think that, especially wrestling, it teaches you a lot of disciplines. I didn't myself get the chance to do judo till I was, 11 or 12. But I would have loved, looking back, I wish my parents would have pushed me more into that sort of stuff. But you got the chance. You got the chance to get a child who could be a professional fighter. When you were watching the pro wrestling, was there a transition for you, or was it as soon as you saw MMA, that was it, you just turned instantly?
I think it was, I don't think it was instantly. I think that there was about a year or 2 gap in between when I stopped watching wrestling and when I started watching MMA. And it was because I think I was just getting tired of the storylines with wrestling. They had, I don't know if anybody cares, but it was when they were getting into a couple of years deep on the NWO thing, and I was just tired of the whole NWO thing, and there was nothing fresh at the time, and so I just stopped watching wrestling, and then eventually, like I said earlier, I seen the Tito and Chuck fight on TV at a sports bar, and I was hooked. So there was probably a year or 2 gap in between then.
I've led it up to this question because I remember that Brock Lesnar was a professional wrestler in around about 2002 to 2004 was kind of his prime. So I'm wondering, when he made the transition to from wrestling to MMA, were you excited to see him fight?
Not that I was ever a big Brock Lesnar fan, but I was excited to see him fight, just to see how someone, that came over from professional wrestling could perform. Someone who was as great of an athlete as Brock Lesnar is, because obviously there's a lot of professional wrestlers that, have talked about transitioning, and some of them have, but, I don't think any of them were actually on the level of Brock Lesnar, where, he was the heavyweight champ in the UFC for a little bit. I was excited to see him come over.
He was a fantastic force, and you've mentioned that you weren't a fan of him wrestling. You've mentioned Chuck Liddell. You've mentioned Brock Lesnar. These are 2 guys who are on a lot of people's favourite fighters lists. So who is your personal favourite fighter, man?
Well, my favorite fighter of all time is definitely Chuck Liddell. He's the one that got me hooked. And, while I first started watching for a while, he was just knocking out everybody. So he was definitely my favorite of all time. Right now, it's really hard to say who my favorite is. I got a couple different favorites. I like Stipe Miocic, who's coming up with a fight with Roy Nelson. Generally, just because he's from Ohio, here where I'm from in the States, and I watched him perform coming up in the smaller organization. So I've always been a fan of Stipe. I'm a big fan of George St. Pierre. He gets a lot of criticism. I'm the type of guy that sometimes I like to go against the grain. If somebody hates somebody, I'm more than likely to like them, which is the case with another heavyweight in Frank Mir. I'm a huge Frank Mir fan. So yeah, those are a couple of my favorite fighters there.
Yeah, I can completely see where you come from with Chuck Liddell. I can't see why you can't like the guy. He is just what everybody loves. The guy who's going to go in there and bang and just see who's got the best chin and see who's can drop the hardest shots. He's a fantastic guy. Anyway, we'd better move on to the biggest news stories of the week. A guy who, if you've been watching the UFC for a long time, you're going to have seen BJ Penn in action. Of course, he's a legend. He is a lightweight like no other out there. He is thinking about returning to the UFC, and not just thinking about it, he's thinking about going to 155, which is a lot where a lot of people want to see him. We don't have time to really dive in it and discuss his career and everything, but if he does make the move to 155 pound, who would you personally like to see him fight?
Personally, I would like to see him fight someone like Gilbert Melendez. While I'm not sure if he could still hang with someone like Gilbert, who is obviously, one of the top 2 or 3 in the 155-pound division, I think it would be an absolute war. So, yeah, that's the fight I would like to see.
And how do you think if he was to somehow get the decision, as close as a decision win that Benson Henderson did over Melendez, would you like to see BJ Penn challenge for the title, or do you think his losses to the likes of McDonald and Nick Diaz makes you think he should not be fighting the best in the world at this stage in his career?
Well, if he got the opportunity to fight Gilbert Melendez and he won against Gilbert, I absolutely think he would. He could deserve a title shot. If he could beat Gilbert Melendez, that would show that he was more focused and in better shape mentally, physically. So, if he could stay that way, then yeah, I'd like to see him challenge for a title.
I'd love to see him. I'd just love to see him back in the lightweight division. It was almost. It just wasn't right seeing him in these. It was almost torture watching him fight these top tier welterweights when he's barely a welterweight himself. I didn't enjoy it at all.
I think just being in the 170-pound division showed a lack of motivation in the first place.
I've got to agree with you. The next biggest news story of the week is Bellator have now signed Rampage. It sounds like they're in talks with Czech Congo. They've signed Diego Nunes. Originally, they said they weren't going to sign any ex-UFC fighters. They've also got the likes of Vladimir Matsuchenko. So, I mean, what's your feelings on this? Has Bjorn Rebney become the next Dana White of saying one thing but doing another?
Yeah, I think he has. I think in a way, I think it does make those guys look bad, as we're seeing the guys that are failing in the UFC and going over there and they're signing them. But, I'm happy for them. I'm glad they are, because even though, they can't, obviously they're not able to hang with the big dogs in the UFC, I still want to see them fight, and I still want to see them be competitive. So, I'm glad they're signing them, but like you said, I think it's kind of making them look bad, especially since he said, one thing before, and now he's going totally against what he said.
Yeah, he can't seem to keep it straight. He is becoming the Dana White. But there's one thing I've got to mention, kind of off the record, is that Rampage is now not only signed with Bellator, he's also in TNA doing the whole Kurt Angle thing, but now he's considering heavyweight. I mean, in the UFC, I don't think he would have hung anywhere near there, but Bellator's heavyweight division is really poor. How do you see him getting on at heavyweight?
Once again, just like Penn at 170, I think it shows an ultimate lack of motivation. And while it, common sense would tell us that Rampage should be able to beat anybody at heavyweight over in Bellator, I would not be surprised if he just was horrible over there. Just considering the lack of motivation, he doesn't like to train. It's obvious. If he's considering going up to heavyweight, I wouldn't be surprised to see him perform horribly. Just because.
I'd love to see him personally fight Seth Petrozelli wherever he goes. Seth's one of my underrated favourites, and I think he's pulled off some upsets before, and a win with Rampage would top off his career. But I guess we better move on to the thing that we mentioned and touched upon earlier, and this is absolutely crazy. To even try and get your head around it is absurd. So Bigfoot, I'm just going to sum this up quickly. Bigfoot called Thiago Silva like mentally sick or something. Then Thiago says, fine, you can say what you want, but come down to 205 and we'll talk about a fight. Bigfoot now is considering medical clearance to fight Thiago Silva at £205. To me, this is just, I think it's not Thiago Silva who's mentally sick. Bigfoot is the one who's mentally sick for even thinking of this crap, man. What's your thoughts on it?
I couldn't agree with you more here, Jay. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that Bigfoot is calling out, Thiago Silva, who's in a complete different weight class. Short of cutting off a limb, Bigfoot isn't going anywhere. There's no possible way he could make 205 in any sort of good condition. Yeah, man, he'd have to be nearly dead if he did make it. It wouldn't be a good fight. Thiago would knock him out in the first 20 seconds of the fight. It's just, it makes no sense to me. It's like, what did Thiago do to Bigfoot to make him, consider killing himself to, fight him?
I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just a fan of Thiago Silva, and another knockout for him, that would always sit well with me, but I don't think it's healthy for Bigfoot, to be honest. And I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. But yeah, Thiago Silva did get the win this weekend, and Bigfoot is coming on for loss. Just correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I can't think of one other heavyweight who cuts down to get to 265 in the current heavyweight division.
No, I think you're right. Shane Carwin, I believe, used to do it, and Brock Lesnar used to do it, and they're both gone now. So I believe that Bigfoot's the only one.
And he's also one of the very few heavyweights right now, other than, I guess, Roy Nelson's considered it and Daniel Cormier's considered it. He's actually thinking about it, and he's cutting down. He's got some issues, man. But
I'd be shocked.
I would pay to see it, though.
Oh, yeah.
I guess we'd better move on to the UFC preview, as there is indeed fights this week, and it's a card that's taken some blows, is all we can say. The main event is no longer Henan Brow versus Eddie Wineland. It is indeed Rashad Evans versus Dan Henderson. How do you see this fight plan out?
To be completely honest, I don't think this is going to be the most exciting fight. I think it might get a little ugly. I think Rashad probably doesn't want much to do with Hendo's, H-bomb. He said in interviews leading up to the fight that he's looking to get 50 takedowns. So, and I think he said it, and I think he will actually stick by that. I think he's going to just keep on, relentlessly trying for takedowns. And, Hendo's had issues with trying to fight fighters who don't try to fight back, with like Machida previously. And, Hendo might be able to, defend a couple takedowns, but when Rashad's going to be relentless with it, I don't think it's gonna help out too much. And ultimately, I just see Rashad making it ugly and ended up winning on a decision.
See, I'm actually going against the grain on this one. I think training at Black Zillions means Rashad Evans, he just hasn't looked the same since moving there. He hasn't looked like a wrestler anymore, and I think he's going to end up striking him and end up on his ass. But that might just be me hoping for it as well. But the co-main event, you have mentioned him before, it is Stipe Miocic versus Roy Nelson. A lot of people are going with Roy Nelson on this one, I'm afraid, man. Do you have hope for Stipe?
I do have a little hope for Stipe. I think he's a smart fighter. He's got a wrestling base, but he's also a really good striker. Obviously no one wants to get hit by Roy Nelson's right hand. That's lights out for everybody. I think all of his wins in the UFC have been by stoppage in the first round, by TKO or KO. So it's not a smart game plan to go in there and stand in front of him. But, I have confidence in Stipe. I think a lot of people think that Stipe is going to try to get this fight to the mat, which I could see him going for a few takedowns, but I do think that he will probably try to outbox Nelson. I think technically he might be a little more sound than Nelson in the boxing game. Obviously, he wouldn't have the same power as Roy, but I can see him just trying to stay out of the way, playing, kind of staying on the outside and just outboxing him for the duration. But ultimately, it'll be tough to last the whole 3 rounds if Roy Nelson lands that one big right hand. Just like I said, it's lights out.
I think you're completely on the right track here. That Miocic is indeed the better fighter of the two. But when it all comes down to it, is Nelson's overhand right? It's hard. It's harder to avoid, and it's easier said than done when all you got to do is defend it. Miocic's chin didn't look the best against Struve, although his striking is phenomenal. He's only had, one decision in his entire career. He is an incredibly good fighter. It's just avoiding Nelson's big right hand. I mean, Congo couldn't do it. I could go on about who he's knocked out, every single person. But if I'm going to say, you've said that you're a fan of Stipe and you think he might win it, so I'm going to say, if Roy Nelson was to win, would you say over or under 3 minutes for Roy Nelson to get the KO?
I'm definitely going to say over 3 minutes. I think Stipe is going to be able to last into the second or third round. Hey, don't get it confused, because I am saying Nelson's going to end up catching him at some point. I do believe Nelson will win this fight, but I don't think it'll be in the first round. So I'd say over.
Well, there we are. I'm going to say under, and we've got like fight camps on the MMA playground, and this is the only real thing that is being debated. It's not a matter of it's not a matter of who's going to win. It's a matter of whether it's going to be over or under 3 minutes. And we've got somebody for the overs. I'm going with the under, so we will find out on Saturday who is right. The rest of the card isn't exactly the strongest out of all the UFCs this year. I mean, a couple of weekends back, we were absolutely honoured to have JDS versus Mark Hunt, and a hell of a lot of good fights, Donald Cerrone and the likes. But this card, after the main event and co-main event, you haven't got a solid undercard. Nonetheless, I know you're a fan of Stipe, so we've got to ignore that fight, Stipe Miocic. Which fight on the card are you most looking forward to?
I think the fight that I'm most looking forward to would have to be probably the Rosie Sexton and Alexis Davis fight, just because, the women coming into the UFC, they've been trying to prove themselves, and, they've just been putting on a hell of a show. And I don't think this one will be any different. They're both veterans. They both, have been around, so, they're both great grapplers, and I love to see some grappling exchanges. And that's the reason why I'm looking forward to that fight the most.
I'm actually going to disagree with you, I'm afraid. As much as I also like the Nelson fight, I am actually going to go with the main event. I am just looking forward to seeing whether Rashad Evans comes in with the game plan he's talked about. And if he doesn't, he will end up on his arse. There is no doubt about it. He can't do what he did with Little Nog again. So, I mean, hopefully this card provides. That's all I can say, because it's not looking the best on the paper.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you.
I guess we had better think about summing this up and hit the early stoppage. I mean, you have had a chance to read the rules, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Brilliant. Well, for anybody who isn't listening, or if you're not listening, then I don't know how you're watching, but whatever. For anybody who hasn't listened before, this is the Early Stoppage. The Early Stoppage is our official game show. Me and my guest this week, it's Brooks. We'll talk about a specific MMA-related subject, and the aim is that you can't say yes, no, or a predetermined word. As soon as the word is said, that person loses. So, for example, the topic could be, what is a knockout? Or something very simple like that. And you can't say the words yes, no, or the word that time would be concussion. It becomes very hard, very tricky, especially when you're passing the baton backwards and forward. Me and my host will be starting by giving a brief intro to the topic and then asking the other player's opinion. So the aim is to pretty much lead them into it, try and make them say yes or no, or deliberately force them into saying something. So anyway, we haven't got long. So the topic this week is frequency of submissions in MMA. Is it on the decline? The words are yes, no, and jiu-jitsu. So, I mean, if you're ready, man, we will go for 4 minutes, I guess. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
Brilliant. Well, I guess we should get started. I mean, this weekend we had an absolutely fantastic display. Eric Silver eventually won submission of the night. But in other cards, submission of the night hasn't even been handed out. What's your thoughts on this?
I think that it's just, it goes back and forth. Sometimes you're going to have the submissions, other times you're not. I do not necessarily think it is on the decline, as we seen with the most recent card. There was, I'm not sure how many you said. I think there was, 7 submissions, which that's a pretty good indication that it's not on the decline.
I can see where you're coming from. However, there have been events recently, such as I can't even remember a few of them, but we have seen that the wrestling people who are on top are able to avoid the submissions. Is there any techniques that happen more often than others?
I do believe, as far as submissions go, I do believe that the rear naked choke is a little bit more common than, say, an arm bar, which I believe is one of the most uncommon to happen. And I believe you're right that the wrestlers, I just think that their submission defense has gotten a lot better. So, I can see where you're coming from, but I'd have to, disagree. I do believe it's probably just as likely to happen as it has been before in the past. It's just going to be hit and miss. I'm not sure of the earlier ones. I think there's only been 1 or 2 where there hasn't been any submissions. But usually we can count on 2 or 3 submissions during the card.
That is true, yeah. But recently, I think we've seen the likes of Benson Henderson, these more modern fighters who come in who submissions just don't seem to work. You never pick them to get submitted. I mean, nobody ever expected Big Nog to be submitted, but he almost feels like a one-off. And then you get the likes of GSP, who that's another one you don't really count to ever be submitted. You could go through the who's who of all the heavyweights, but none of them have tapped in a long, long time. It's almost like chin is becoming more of a factor, and submissions aren't. I mean, you look at back in the beginning days, you had the Gracies. The Gracies brought in specific styles, and now it's not. I just think that it's not relevant. Submissions are almost becoming. think they're becoming rare. Do you think that chin is becoming a bigger factor than submissions?
I definitely think that knockouts are probably more common. But, if we're talking about, from UFC 1 to now, obviously there's been a decline in submissions. But, I guess if that's the, what we're going with, if we're saying from 1 until now, yeah, I think there's been a decline. But over the past couple years, I don't think so. Not so much. I mean, is that what you're basing it off of? If you're basing it off of the absolute very first UFC until now?
Well, the Gracies just made it seem really they were up there. They were just fantastic. They were able to score a submission every time they fought. But now, I guess we just don't see it that often.
No, I gotta say that the Gracies that are still around, such as Roger Gracie, he is still getting his submissions in pretty much every fight too. So I guess it might just be who we're talking about too. So if we're seeing jiu-jitsu champions. We're seeing those guys on the cards.
You managed to pull off the word jiu-jitsu. However, we had actually passed the 4-minute mark. So you are okay. And this is the first ever draw. So it is now 3. Well, I'm still at 3. The guests are on 4. But we have had a draw. So congratulations, man.
Yeah, you know what? I can take a loss. I said jujitsu.
No, we had passed. My timer went off, but you were talking, so I didn't want to interrupt. But no, fair play to you, man. A lot of people come on this show and fall for my basics. I tried the old "Are you ready?" technique on so many people. I didn't try that on you, but nobody's fallen for the "Are you ready?" I mean, I've said yeah in the last few weeks now, but
Yeah, just to finish up on my thought on that, when we got guys like Jacare and Hodger Gracie, and now we've seen Antonio Braga Neto and Damian Maya. Those are the guys that are getting their submissions, and we'll see. I guess it has been declined amongst other fighters, but the jiu-jitsu champions, they're still getting theirs.
who is your favorite? Just out of interest, who is your favorite submissionist?
I'd have to go with Hodger right now, Hodger Gracie.
That's fair enough. I think mine is probably Damien Meyer. I'd like to say Jacare, but I just think he's right now. I'm just saying that because I saw him the other week.
Yeah.
But anyway, I really want to thank you for coming on this week, man.
Hey, I appreciate you letting me on here, Jay. It's a pleasure, and hopefully I can get back on here sometime soon in the future.
That would be brilliant. Yeah, for all you guys wondering, again, I've said it multiple times, but you got to go check out the MMA Addiction. That is where you can find Brooks. I'm sure you can find him on the MMA Playground. If you just keep an eye out for Playground Samurai or call him out, he'll be there. He's an original there. He's been there since the start. But I really want to thank you again. I've had a lot of fun on this show. And hopefully, yeah, like you said, we'll get you back soon. Thanks, guys, for listening. And I guess we'll catch you next week.
Hey, thanks, Jay.